Hey everyone, welcome back to our History 117 lectures. This one is going to be maybe a little bit strange. We're going to be looking at land empires in the age of imperialism. So we're going back to the Ottomans, Russia, China, and we're going to look at how they're dealing with European powers as the 19th century progresses. We'll start with the Ottomans. During the 1700s, the central government of the Ottoman Empire lost much of its power to provincial governors, military commanders, ethnic leaders, and bandit chiefs. In several parts of the empire, local officials and large landholders tried to increase their independence and divert imperial funds into their own coffers. The Ottoman weakness allowed Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, a puritanical fundamentalist from Arabia, to take control of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina and deprive the Sultan of organizing the annual pilgrimage. Mamluk slave soldiers, who as a military class that ruled Egypt between 1260 to 1517, re-emerged as a military force, and the Ottoman Janissaries, who had evolved into a hereditary military class with the Mamluks, used their Istanbul power base to force the Sultan to abandon his efforts to train a modern European-style army. For the Sultans, the outlook was bleak, but the situation changed unexpectedly when France and Napoleon invaded Egypt. In May 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte and an invasion force of 36,000 men and 400 ships invaded Egypt. The French quickly defeated the Mamluks. 15 months later, Napoleon attempted an invasion of Syria. By the way, Syria is kind of important these days. There's a whole situation involving Turkey there. Anyway, just watch the news when it's not coronavirus. The Ottomans held firm, and the British Royal Navy stopped them even more. Napoleon secretly left Cairo and returned to France, which was still in the grips of the revolution. Napoleon seized power there and crowned himself emperor. Back in Egypt, though, his generals were cut off from France by British ships in the Mediterranean Sea and had little hope of remaining in power. They agreed to withdraw in 1801. That left a power vacuum in Egypt. The Ottoman Sultan sent Muhammad Ali, again, not the boxer, and Albanian soldiers to Egypt to restore imperial control over a growing nationalist movement. Muhammad Ali emerged victorious. By 1805, Muhammad Ali was the official governor, and by 1811 he got rid of the Mamluks. Muhammad Ali's rise to power coincided with the meteoric career of Emperor Napoleon I. It is not surprising, therefore, that he adopted many French practices in rebuilding the Egyptian state. Militarily, he established special schools for training artillery and cavalry officers, army surgeons, military bandmasters, and others. The curricula of these schools featured European skills and sciences, and Muhammad Ali began sending promising officer trainees to France for education. In 1824, he started a gazette, the first newspaper in the Islamic world, and he also built various sorts of factories to outfit his new army, if you remember from the Industrial Revolution lecture talking a little bit about his construction of factories. But they did not really prove to be very efficient. However, the factories showed a determination to achieve independence from the Ottoman Empire and to equal the European powers. In the 1830s, Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim, invaded Syria and implemented some of the same changes his father had made in Egypt. Ibrahim commanded an expeditionary force to help the Sultan win the Greek War of Independence from the Ottomans, which inspired the Sultan to start building his own new army. In 1839, these forces battled against each other when Ibrahim invaded Anatolia. Ibrahim's forces won. There was a chance he could take Istanbul, but Europeans intervened and forced his withdrawal to Egypt. Despite this setback, Muhammad Ali remained in charge of Egypt until his death in 1849, and his family remained the ruling family of Egypt until 1952. At the end of the 18th century, Sultan Selim III, who was a forward-looking ruler, introduced reforms to create European-style military units, to bring provincial governors under a central control, and a standardized taxation. This meant a rise in government expenditures, and they had to pay for them somehow. Sultan Selim wanted to tax certain items, such as tobacco and coffee, to offset the costs. The Janissaries resisted the military reforms, and of course, no one likes increased taxes. The Janissary Military Corps violently resisted the creation of new military units, and the reforms ultimately failed on political grounds. At times, the Janissary power produced military uprisings. And I talked about the Janissary revolts in the last time we were talking about the Ottomans. In the Ottoman territory of Serbia, local residents resented the control exercised by Janissary governors. Orthodox Christians claimed that the Janissaries abused them. In response, Sultan Selim threatened to reassign the Janissaries to Istanbul. Suspecting that the Sultan wanted to curb their political power with his reforms, in 1805 the Janissaries revolted and massacred Christians in Serbia. Unable to re-establish central Ottoman rule over Serbia, the Sultan had to rely on the ruler of Bosnia, another Balkan province, who joined his troops with the peasants of Serbia to suppress the Janissary uprising. When the threat of Russian intervention prevented the Ottomans from disarming the victorious Serbians, Serbia became effectively independent. Other opponents of reform included ulama, or Muslim religious scholars, who distrusted the secularization of laws and taxation that Selim had proposed. In the face of widespread rejection of his reforms, Selim suspended his program in 1806. Nevertheless, a massive military uprising occurred at Istanbul, and the Sultan was deposed and imprisoned. Reform forces recaptured the Ottoman capital, but not before Selim had been executed. Selim's cousin, Sultan Mahmud II, cautiously revived Selim's program, but he realized that the reforms needed to be more systematic and imposed more forcefully. The effectiveness of radical reform in Muhammad Ali's Egypt drove this lesson home. The biggest thing Mahmud had to address when he was Sultan was the Greek independence movement from the Ottoman Empire. In 1821, Greeks began a nationalist revolt against the Ottomans. Egypt's Ibrahim Pasha had a lot of success putting down various Greek factions on behalf of the empire, but ultimately the Ottomans failed when English, French, and Russian forces intervened. The Greeks won their independence with help. In the wake of the Ottoman defeat, Mahmud announced the creation of a new artillery unit. It was actually started 4 years earlier in 1826. That was the year of what's called the Auspicious Incident. The book only briefly mentions this and doesn't really mention it by name. So what happened was the Janissaries, some 135,000 of them, revolted against Mahmud II. Now there's some historians that claim Mahmud purposely incited the Janissaries to attack, but regardless of how it happened, it happened. And when I say revolt, I mean the Janissaries are heading to the Sultan's palace. Mahmud used the holy banner of the Prophet Muhammad to inspire people to come to fight against the Janissaries. So basically, the Sultan put a fatwa against the Janissaries. In the ensuing fight, someone set fire to the Janissary barracks, resulting in 4,000 deaths. The Janissary survivors of the battle in Constantinople were forced out of the empire via exile or were executed via decapitation. That was the beginning of the new artillery unit, and that was the end of the Janissaries. So back to Mahmud. He doesn't really feel like he can make these reforms without reducing the power of the religious elite, the ulama. When Egypt's Ibrahim attacked from Syria in 1839, that put an end to Mahmud's restructuring of the Ottoman bureaucracy and the educational and legal systems where the ulama had the strongest power. Mahmud died before he could make these reforms. Mahmud's death, combined with the loss of Greece, left the Ottoman Empire completely dependent on European powers for survival via trade and military support, which we'll get to in the Crimean War. Mahmud's reform legacy, the Tanzimat, was implemented first by his son and heir, Abdul Majid. Europeans were also supportive of these reform measures. One reform called for public trials and equal protection under the law for everyone, whether Muslim, Christian, or Jew. It also guaranteed some rights of privacy, equalized the eligibility of men for conscription into the army, and provided a formalized method of tax collection. As one legal code after another replaced religious laws, the Sharia law gradually became restricted to matters of family law, so think of like marriage or inheritance. The rise of secularization gradually restricted the job opportunities for the ulama. Most historians see the Tanzimat as the dawn of modern thought and enlightened government in the Middle East. Others contend that removing the religious elite from influence in government also removed a check on the power of the Sultan. In the capital city of Istanbul, the reforms stimulated the growth of a small but cosmopolitan minority of people who embraced European languages and cultures. The first Turkish newspaper appeared in 1831, modeled after Muhammad Ali's Gazette. Other newspapers followed, many written in French. Travel to Europe, especially England and France, became popular among wealthy Turks. In the 1880s, the rail line, the Orient Express, connected Paris and Istanbul and provided a great setting for Agatha Christie's novel, Murder on the Orient Express. Now, there's a number of cultural effects from the Tanzimat, including changes in dress, hairstyles, facial hair, and the concern by Europeans about the Christians, the mechanization of, quote, women's work, such as weaving, and ending women's inheritance rights. But that's all for this section of the lecture. In the next one, we're going to pick up talking a little bit about Russia. Stay tuned.